who awesome. Thank you for agreeing to that. Yeah, so Jonathan has been in Madagascar, and then he came here to the Smithsonian, and then he was over at the Architect of the Capitol, and now he's at one of my favorite places. I grew up in Vermont, and when I moved here, I thought, no way am I staying. But I found Dumbarton Oaks, and I found Rock Creek Park, and I found the Botanic Garden, and I thought, okay, I can stay here. So we have the great fortune of having Jonathan, who is the director of gardens at Dumbarton Oaks. And it was fun. A number of us got together earlier, and some of you have not been to Dumbarton Oaks. So I'm curious, with a show of hands, who has not been to Dumbarton Oaks? Awesome. You guys are in for a treat. So I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan. And Jonathan, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
My pleasure. I'm going to sit. I'm enjoying this informal setting here, which is really nice.
You have cell phones, if you can put them on silent, that would be awesome.
Yeah. If you like, yeah, whatever you all in the room like.
That's much better.
That's great.
All right.
Yeah,
that's great. All right. Well, I'm thrilled to be here with you all. It's great to be able to talk about Dumbarton Oaks. It's really nice to be back at the Smithsonian. It's been a minute for me, so it's really nice to see some of the trees growing and some changes around campus. And it's great to have the opportunity to share these incredible gardens with you. I titled this talk "The Next Century in the Gardens at Dumbarton Oaks" because we just celebrated our centennial in 2022. The 100-year mark of Beatrix Farron's start of her design work at Dumbarton Oaks. And this was a really great milestone. It allowed us to look back at the careful stewardship of the garden over the last century and to reaffirm our vision of the next century to maintain and showcase Beatrix Farron's design intent, but also by bringing a modern horticultural context to ensure the relevance of these gardens for generations to come. So I'm going to share with you a little bit about the garden and some of the background on the garden, and then give you kind of a behind the scene peek at some of the challenges and opportunities we face in managing a historic space. So I've included, oh, is it not, why is it not progressing
slightly?
I can just say in that moment, if I was ever going to get arrested, it was because I was going to jump the fence and go in the pool.
And that is a rite of passage. Most of the folks that have worked at Dumbarton Oaks have broken into swimming in the pool at one point or another. Yeah, this doesn't seem to be advancing my slides. Yeah, I'm on the next slide.
Well,
It's
oh,
just
maybe
not...
one. Oh, you might not be actually presenting. Go and
From beginning.
yeah.
We've all been doing this for a year. Still.
I know.
I don't know if someone online can see if they can. It's still not progressing.
No. You could hit escape and see if you can get rid of
Yeah,
that.
let me try. Let me start over.
Yeah, I don't know what that red thing is at the top.
It's close to the top.
I guess hit resume slideshow.
Thing is sharing the screen, and then the red is stop sharing.
Yes.
Try doing that little one right there.
This.
Yeah.
Sorry, everyone online. Let's give us a minute. We'll figure this out. And
That's the peanut.
oh,
Close
is it
it.
open in multiple?
No.
Okay, let's close it. Let's close it and open it once. Try that again.
Oh, I like that.
Okay. Did they all go away?
Oh, now it says no signal
What is
connected.
the term peanut gallery?
That's a very
Oh
good
my God, we
question.
just looked this up.
It's actually not very good. I don't know.
Right.
If this takes very long.
Well, this is way better than the time that I was hosting a speaker and had to be on the other side of this. There we go.
All right. Let's make
Now.
sure we're still sharing. Zoom, folks.
Yeah, well, it just came up with that. It didn't come up with the first screen before you go to full screen.
Can you all still hear us?
I don't see a screen, but I hear you.
Okay.
Share. There, that one, slideshow, maybe.
I think that's some kind of,
Yeah, yeah.
Can see the screen.
but you have a separate intro slide of this,
No, that's the intro slide.
but you only have one version of that, and that's the first slide.
Yes.
PowerPoint.
Let's
Alright,
see.
try it now.
Let's see this.
I'm just doing it like that, yeah.
There we go. All right, we're back up and running. All right. So yes. All right. So I've included a map for all of you to follow along, especially those few in the minority that have never been to Dumbarton Oaks. We'll have to change that. But this will help you in following along as we traverse through the gardens. Of course, a full garden tour would take about 2 hours. So I'm really just going to be focusing on some design highlights and an abbreviated overview of the garden so that I can also share with you some of the things that we're doing from a preservation standpoint. This map shows the current campus, showing all the non-public areas in dark green and the public areas in light green. Of course, it's important to realize that this is only a fraction of the land that the Blisses owned when they owned the property. There was an additional 27 acres to the north of this that was donated to the National Park Service and is now Dumbarton Oaks Park and part of Rock Creek Park. Then they also sold a small bit to the Danish government, which is the site of the Danish embassy now. So they owned all that land originally, purchased in 1922 and donated to Harvard in 1941. The property at Dumbarton Oaks has a long post-colonial history, from the first patent holder, Ninian Beale, in 1699 through the Blisses purchase of the property in 1921. Today, Dumbarton Oaks is a Harvard Research Center and a scholarship and a center of scholarship in the humanities, with areas of study in Byzantine, pre-Columbian, and garden and landscape studies. We have one of the leading research libraries and collections in the world, a museum, a book imprint, which publishes about a dozen volumes a year, and the stewardship of the 16 acres of Farron designed gardens, which are considered really one of her last preserved gardens of about the 200 that she designed in the US. One of the geniuses of Farron's design at Dumbarton Oaks is really her seamless combination of formal French and Italian design aesthetics combined with those of English cottage and picturesque styles and the American landscape movement, all kind of mixed up to create a series of unique and really intimate spaces that showcase the tension between formality and informality and symmetry and asymmetry. And one of the real special things about the way she mixed those styles is that she really kind of created her own style in that, and you never feel like you're in the French room or the English room. It's a more complex kind of relationship. Her design talent in folding the design landscape into the existing and very difficult topography creates intimate and yet awe-inspiring effect. Her use of woody plants as sentinels that guide one through the gardens is simple and elegant. And Farron had a really incredible attention to detail in designing everything from plantings and hardscaping to the furniture and all the other garden ornament in the garden, often providing Mrs. Bliss with several options and then iteratively producing mock-ups for approval. So on the left, you see a drawing where she has illustrated 4 different pepper pots, and Miss Bliss would have picked one that she liked. Miss Farron would have then produced normally a mock-up out of plaster or clay, and then sent photographs. And then once the final was approved, then she would go and fabricate it. And there was a lot of changing in between those iterations of approval. Her real masterful ability to tuck lines of axis into corners, to play with perspectives, and to conceal and then really surprisingly reveal points of interest are all lasting testaments to her great skill in landscape design. She worked around existing and ancient trees like these deodar cedars that frame the east lawn. And here they are, shown on the left as fairly young trees when Farron first surveyed the property in 1922. You could see her surveying stakes out there in the east lawn. Here it is today. She incorporated plantings into this palimpsest of this site, really utilizing plants for their color, their texture and scale, almost like actors in a play. Her first letter to Mildred Bliss in 1922, Farron writes about the East Lawn and the R Street border, noting, quote, "While in no way should the planting on R Street look as though it were intended to close out people's view of the place, it should in effect do this, but by giving them pretty and interesting plants to look at, with occasional calculated glimpses to the place arranged so that they will not rake the windows and gardens. The passerby will not feel crudely excluded, and yet additional privacy will be secured to the owners of the oaks." She worked around existing topography, following lessons that she had learned from William Robinson and Charles Sargent to fit the landscape to the land and not vice versa. She wrote, quote, "No planting should be countenanced in any way that would distract one's attentions from the simple and beautiful lines of the gardens and the magnificent oak trees that surround the house." Pictured here, she created the green terrace, the loggia, and swimming pool on the site of what was originally a two-story barn and a manure pit. Incidentally, the green terrace adjacent to the house, it was a favorite outdoor entertainment spot for the Blisses, and was so named because of this was the color palette that was required for that space. Mrs. Bliss didn't want any conflict with the guest couture. Below the swimming pool, Farron worked with the existing grades and drives to create the circulation paths and mass plantings like Crabapple Hill pictured here. And what you have to realize is that that walkway that skirts around the edge of Crabapple Hill was originally a driveway that came out and connected onto R Street. So in many cases, Farron is repurposing existing infrastructure and things that had already been altered on the site and then repurposing them rather than, erasing them or building over them. On the north side of the house, Farron took a sloping sliver of turf and created the North Vista, which is one of her first interventions on the property. And it's also one of the last areas where she was still tweaking her design when she retired. And here's a picture from her first visits to the property in 1922. And here's a modern picture. This promontory consists of 4 terraces. There's 3 sets of ha-ha steps that frame the house from the end of the vista. And this, along with the wall plantings that Farron employed, were really intended to help shrink the scale of the house, which she found overly large. The espaliered magnolia are interesting. As you probably know, this technique of planting woody ornamentals against buildings was pretty groundbreaking at the time. This is a technique Farron pioneered when she did her campus work notably at Princeton and Yale and the quad at Princeton, where she pulled out all the plantings from the center and planted woody plants up against the buildings. It was fairly controversial at the time. Some of the buildings at Princeton were fairly new, and some of the architects were not happy that she was hiding them with plants. They called her the bush lady. To the east of the house, the steepest slope, Farron arranged a series of terraces carefully planned to facilitate ease of movement, intimacy, and horticultural interest, while also being sensitive to the, quote, natural slopes of the ground and the desire to keep as many of the native trees as possible unhurt and undisturbed. That quote's from page 205 of her plant book. So it's really interesting that she was focusing on native plants even back then. Although the garden is not at all a native plant garden. Farron's use of trees as focal points, markers, and screening is evident throughout the gardens. Here on Beach Terrace, she worked her wall around an existing European beech, which subsequently died in the 1940s and was replaced with this magnificent American beech. I like to think that an insightful gardener topped this tree at a young age, knowing that its lateral branches would perfectly fill the space and create one of the more majestic moments in the gardens. This picture was taken in 2021, and we'll come back to this tree in a little bit. Don't worry, it's still there. But this is probably the tree that keeps me up at night more than any other tree at Dumbarton Oaks. Progressing down the steps from Beach Terrace, past Ern Terrace, and into the Rose Garden, one is reminded of Farron's careful attention to detail, especially regarding ergonomics and I always mess this word up, kinesiology through the gardens, study of movement. And she writes in the plant book about the steps needing shallow risers and generous treads, stipulating that there must be an even set and that there must be landings after 10 steps and there must be a place to sit. And then she breaks all those rules when she gets into the wilder parts of the gardens. And not just any bench. Here's a Farron designed unique piece of furniture. She designed 45 unique pieces of furniture in the gardens. This is actually a reproduction that we had done in, I think, 2019. And it's sitting on the landing between the first set of 10 steps and the next set of 20 per her guidance. In fact, the entire existence of the urn terrace above the rose garden and fountain terrace below the rose garden are really due to the fact that they contain the interstitial space that she needed to accomplish comfortable steps. The rose garden was Mrs. Bliss's pride and joy, and it was the first terrace that Farron designed. And it's interesting from the perspective of this picture, you don't even really see the landing between the run of 20 and 10 steps, and the urn terrace kind of melts away into the background and is hidden by the walls. So it almost looks like the beach from Beach Terrace is coming out from the next space. So she's really good at hiding her work. Farron carefully worked the south and the north sides of the rose garden around existing deodar cedars and a steep drop off, and then figured out the dimensions that she would need to accomplish this design, and then worked on the other terraces to facilitate entry to this terrace. It's about a 50-foot drop from the green terrace where we began this tour down to the lower levels of the lower terraces. It's quite a grade change. Below the rose garden, Fountain Terrace helps to soften the massive retaining walls needed to navigate this impressive grade change comfortably. Here, Farron turned the stairs in to save space and to break up the lines on the walls. And notice the bench canopy with the finial showing a sheaf of wheat. This is the Bliss family crest. And on the other side of that bench, the finial is serving dual purposes. So it's also acting as a crown for this bench located in the rose garden on the opposite side of that wall. And here the inscription Quod Severus Metis is inscribed into the bench. This is representing the Bliss's family motto, as you reap, or as you sow, so shall you reap. And that with the sheaf of wheat was kind of their family crest. It makes a lot of sense when you realize the way they set Dumbarton Oaks up, because they really thought of every detail and really set it up to live on as a home for the humanities in a really successful way. It's interesting how Farron used the bench backs, and she talks about this in her writing about how much more difficult landscape design is than some of the other art forms. She talks about painting and how nobody is ever flipping the painting around and looking at the back, but when you're designing a landscape, especially with a challenging topography like Dumbarton Oaks, you're really looking at these pieces of art from all angles, and so you have to consider really carefully the scale and texture. This is the last of the terraces, Arbor Terrace, and on this terrace, Farron reemployed a small section of a much larger pavilion that she had sketched while visiting France as a budding designer. At Chateau Montargis, she had sketched a magnificent pavilion, no longer existing, designed by Almarn du Cerceau, and she recreated a small portion of it to soften this elevation of the west wall of Arbor Terrace. Again, Farron was very self-conscious about the walls and the grade changes. She writes a lot about these formidable walls and that how she would need to soften the walls. And so she uses arbors and plantings to accomplish that. This terrace looks out over the orchards and the herbaceous border, the kitchen gardens, and Cherry Hill, which as you leave this terrace, kind of we get into a wilder section of the gardens. So now I'm going to switch gears for a minute and I'll talk about change, which, as we know, is really one of the only constants in gardening. While some changes at Dumbarton Oaks have been made to remove infrastructure or to reinforce infrastructure and facilitate the transition from a private garden in the Bliss era to an institutional garden in the Harvard area, like bricking over of grass pathways, like this example here of Boxwood Walk. Other changes occurred as the gardens have matured and philosophies towards tree stewardship, for example, have evolved. Farron talks in her writings about needing to replace trees every 20 years or so as they got out of scale. And that's obviously a practice we don't follow anymore. So I often wonder what she would think if she came to the garden and saw some of these mature trees that maybe are out of scale, but lend their own kind of magnificent quality nonetheless. And some of the particular plants, while some of them have changed, the structure, the layers, the detailing, and really the essence of the gardens are largely intact. Here you see a replacement of honeysuckle and vinca minor from Farron's day on the left to turfgrass and liriope. The turfgrass is also layered with spring ephemerals. And now we're rethinking the past liberal use of liriope at Dumbarton Oaks, and there's a lot of transitioning to native sedges in many areas, and we're realizing how, in some cases, almost invasive liriope can be. So while our centennial was first and foremost a time to celebrate the beauty of these historic spaces and the dedication of those who've cared for them over the past century, it really also provided us an opportunity to look ahead into the next century. Maintaining a historic garden such as Dumbarton Oaks is a really difficult business. The tricky topography, the unforgiving access, the intricate detailing. At the same time, these challenges also present opportunities to improve, to ensure the gardens remain relevant in a modern horticultural context over the next century. And so following Farron's spirit of constant evolution as a guiding principle, we're focused on improving ecosystem services, stormwater management, and plant diversity while still maintaining Farron's design intent and preserving ornament and other architectural elements. We're also very fortunate that we have a lot of writing from her. We have the Blisses really didn't live in the house for most of the time they owned it. He worked for the State Department and was stationed in France and later in South America. And so the gardens were largely designed by correspondence. And so we have all those letters between Mrs. Bliss and Farron. And then Farron wrote a book about the gardens documenting her design intent in the transition to Harvard. So those letters and the book are really our preservation guide together. And then with that, we look at how Farron would approach the problem that we're dealing with. We're really fortunate, again, in the richness of the archives and in Farron's writings. We have a really good understanding of her philosophy and regarding plant succession in the gardens. Her approach was really to use plants in distinct ways to serve a larger function, with each plant kind of fulfilling an individual role in service to the greater design. And if a plant wasn't pulling its weight, she would replace it. So it's really not a botanic garden. It's a garden where the plants are there for the overall composition, not for their individuality. So understanding this philosophy gives us the better courage to make plant substitutions and steward the gardens as we continue to shepherd their evolution. And now I will share with you some examples of some challenges and opportunities, beginning with the complex issue of invasive plants and ecosystem services. It's certainly difficult at Dumbarton Oaks. And as I alluded before, while Farron was a big proponent of native plants, as evidenced in her gardening at Reef Point, and the work she undertook at Dumbarton Oaks was really different. It utilized really a large number of non-native plants, and several of which are now considered invasive. And the challenge is really to maintain the design integrity while channeling Farron's spirit and as the plant palette evolves. So here's an example from a 2019 renovation on Urn Terrace that I'll come back to in a minute. So in 2018, we hosted a Harvard Graduate School of Design intern who worked with us on a project called Reinterpreting Farron. And for this project, Joan, she cataloged all the invasive plants currently in the gardens. She cross-referenced them with Farron's plant list and made a field guide and conducted case studies to assess opportunities where we could remove and replace, where we needed to manage, depending on the particular plant. So here's a case study from Joan's project. This is focusing on Urn Terrace, formerly called Box Terrace. On the left, you see Farron's original design, and on the right, a later alteration overseen by Ruth Havey, who was Farron's protege and the project manager on Dumbarton Oaks, and took over for Farron when she retired in early 1950s. So this space is one of many that received changes in the transition to Harvard from a private garden to an institutional campus. Changes here included bricking over of pathways. The grass pathways were bricked over. The bed lines were altered. The replacement of boxwood with English ivy. And the replacement of ground cover with turf grass. You can't really tell on the picture on the left, but it was originally Vinca minor and was replaced with turf grass. And then there was an addition in the middle around the urn of a pebble mosaic, which was actually a mock-up for another part of the garden called the Pebble Garden, where Mrs. Bliss funded an intervention in the 1960s, actually, that Ruth Havey oversaw. And so they did a mock-up in the middle there to make sure that that Ruth Havey could satisfy Mrs. Bliss's high standards. Notice also in the background, Japanese wisteria and English ivy on the wall as well. So here's the restoration. This is still young. It looks much better now. This picture was taken in spring of 2020. The turf grass was replaced with Mazus reptans, substituting from Farron's original Vinca minor. The boxwood was brought back, albeit we're using Buxus Little Missy instead of English boxwood. As we are combating boxwood blight in the gardens. We discovered boxwood blight in 2019, my first year at the gardens, and we've been steadily trying in situ cultivars and alternative selections. So we've got six, I think six right now that we're trialing in the gardens. You also notice that we left the English ivy and the wisteria, which Farron writes about extensively throughout the plant book. Here, these plants can be managed through seed management and making sure that they stay in their lanes. In fact, the English ivy is an interesting case study for our intern because Farron used it liberally throughout the gardens. In the case of Ern Terrace with English ivy as a bedding plant, it was a very easy decision to remove it. But when English ivy is used as an architectural accent on walls or as a sturdy ground cover on a steep 2-to-1 slope, it's a more nuanced decision. And speaking of wisteria, we have lots of wisteria in the gardens. It was one of Farron's favorite plants and also Mrs. Bliss's favorite. And there's iconic sections of the North Vista and the Pebble Garden and around the Orangery and elsewhere that are just filled with Wisteria floribunda and senescens. We do have a few American specimens, but they're used in other areas. In fact, the wisteria is so iconic, it was even included in a collection of forever stamps that was issued in 2020 by the U.S. Postal Service celebrating 10 American gardens. So our treatment strategy for this plant has been to leave it in place, but to prune seed pods wherever possible in the winter before they split so that and then roguing out volunteers in the garden. And we found that it's actually very manageable if you do those things. And the English ivy, incidentally, on the walls, we just keep it in its juvenile form. So there's a couple sections that will start to mature and begin to flower, and then we prune those out, and we're able to more or less keep it in place. The next example I'll share is an example of reclamation. Here you can see a young Melisande allée, complete with Farron's rulers in the center background, marking out a spot for a possible but never realized urn. This picture is taken even before the construction of the charming path that skips through the allée, connecting the Lover's Lane pool down to the herbaceous borders and kitchen gardens below. This is a really early shot. In fact, the eastern line of silver maple was existing, and Farron brought in the line, the western line on the left of the image to create the allée. Here's an image from a few years ago, same path a few summers ago. Notice the privet obscuring the allée line on the right side of the image. The buffer here between the property, this is really at the end of our property line. So the buffer here is only about 10 to 20 feet deep before it meets a chain link fence that sits atop about a 15-foot retaining wall that is the border of our property with Montrose Park. So there's a real desire here to maintain the intimacy of the allée that Farron had envisioned. But we realized behind that that eastern line of the LA, we just had a massive invasive plants that were, and really nothing else. So in 2020, we started a project to reclaim the buffer in a phased approach that would be sensitive to the intimacy of the LA and also to the gardener's capacity to take on large projects. We do this a lot. We do small phased projects in the garden so that we don't like have any really jarring changes. And also because we just have the luxury of saying, we're going to take our time and do this. No one is telling us that we need to change everything out in a really kind of quick or kind of display focused way. So we're looking at the long picture. So we removed the invasives, enough invasives to provide planting space. We didn't want to completely clear cut the area or we would have really ruined the intimacy of the space. Then next, the gardeners planted about 300 native shrubs, including Lindera, Ilex, Cephalanthus, Itea, a few viburnum, and then a few evergreens, Morella, Magnolia virginiana, Australis. So now we're waiting for those things to grow in. Once that restored buffer is grown in a bit, we will remove the rest of the invasives, plant a kind of a second phase, and then we'll remove that front line that you saw kind of obscuring the LA. So it's planned for about a 10-year transition, but when we're done, we'll have a really nice native plant buffer and still maintain the privacy of the LA. There are certainly other challenges involving invasives, such as maintaining an acre of pristine forsythia on a steep slope under pressure from porcelainberry and bittersweet and bindweed. Reinforcing the buffer plantings throughout the property really aids in mitigating some of this constant pressure, especially because we back up to Rock Creek Park and Montrose Park, and those areas are severely under-resourced, as you know, and real havens for invasive plants. And so we really try our best to keep them out. And sometimes some of the biggest challenges really reap unexpected rewards. Such was the case in 2021. We found ourselves trying to recover from over a year of restrictive COVID operations, which led to a severe garden labor shortage, an explosion of weeds, deferred pruning. The garden was really in rough shape in 2020 and into 2021. And this all looked magical to Annie Leibovitz, who came to visit unexpectedly one afternoon. She loved the wild and overgrown nature of the garden. And this led to a featuring of the gardens in Vogue magazine in September of 2021, along with the Abbey Aldridge Rockefeller Garden, which is the other Farron garden. It's located up in Maine in Mount Desert Island. And it's really the only other well-preserved Farron garden. And so they did the photo shoot at both gardens. They were originally going to just shoot at Abbey Aldridge, and Annie Leibovitz loved Dumbarton Oaks so much she kind of changed the whole plan on a short notice. I had to talk my boss into letting us do this. We don't do photo shoots in the garden, but they agreed to write a piece, an accompanying article about Beatrix Farron. So that made it mission connected, and then we were allowed to do it. So it was a really magical, fun experience. And here's here just for fun. Here's a picture of Annie in the Lover's Lane pool to get that shot that you saw on the previous page. Tree succession is another challenge, and especially considering that many of the iconic spaces in the gardens are so magical because of the trees which grace them. Also compounding the challenge is the topography and the access throughout the gardens. You have to realize most of the garden gates in the gardens are about 32 inches wide at the widest. And so lots of steps and uneven terrain. And so it's really hard to get anything really much larger than a 2-inch caliper tree in place. And sometimes even that is a real challenge. So because of this, patience is needed. And smaller trees, smaller plantings, sometimes a new tree will be planted before the tree that it's meant to replace has fully declined. If it doesn't significantly impact the design, we'll do that. Here's an example of that. You can see this is actually one of the oldest trees on the property. This is a pre-Bliss, pre-Farron Magnolia denudata that Mrs. Bliss and Farron loved. They called it the bride. They talked about the blooms every spring. And you can see it's declining slowly. It's been declining actually for a while. But this tree tells a great story. And actually, you can see there's quite a bit of sucker growth at the base that we're curating now to be the next generation of that tree. But also you can see the replacement, or now I would call it a companion, that was planted 15 years ago by my predecessor. And I used to joke with our house archivist that every other generation of tree would be in the right place, because we're always kind of pre-planting. But I feel much better about this practice now because I came across a letter from Beatrix Farron to John Thatcher, who was the first director under Harvard. So she wrote this letter in 1946, and she talks about a report, which is the plant book that Harvard wanted her to write to document her design. She really didn't want to do it. It took her a while and kind of a lot of pushing and pulling to get her to do it. And then she also references a gentleman named Bryce, who was the first head gardener under Harvard. So she writes to John Thatcher in 1946. She says, "You might like to know that work on the Dumbarton Oaks report is again started, and it seems likely that the report as a whole will be more useful to show the temperament of the place than the actual position of each tree and shrub." When Bryce told me that he wanted, or when Bryce said that he wanted a book so he could abide by it, it made my blood run cold, as nothing will so quickly kill the spirit of any place than to have planting slavishly repeated in certain places because it was originally put there. So that made me feel really better about our kind of pragmatic approach to tree succession. And sometimes an iconic tree, or in this case, an entire grove of trees, has to be replaced in a more exacting manner. So this was a project we undertook on the part of the garden called the Ellipse in 2019. This is an area that it's a double aerial hedge of American hornbeam. It was designed by Alden Hopkins in the mid-1960s. This was a redesign of a previous Farrand area. She had a mature American boxwood hedge with a much simpler pool with a single jet fountain. But she noted in her writing that the boxwood was declining and would need to be replaced, but that careful study would be needed. She never got around to the careful study, and so Mrs. Bliss contracted with a number of landscape architects to consult, and this was the end result. So this was actually Alden Hopkins and Ralph Griswold together. And when I came on board at Dumbarton Oaks, there were only 41 of these 76 trees left in this planting. So they had really been declining, and I think they were losing about 5 or 6 trees a year. You can see they were in kind of rough shape. So they'd been trained in a particular form. So to replace them, we needed custom grown trees that would be able to be treated in the same way. So luckily my predecessor had put a plan into place to custom grow these trees at Ramilton Farms in Maryland in order to meet the specifications. It was 8 feet of clear trunk with a uniform, like sheared crown. You would never buy a tree like that at a nursery. You would never grow a tree like that at a nursery. So this is why we had to custom grow them. And but it was a great project. Started in 2013 by growing these trees, and then by the time I came here, I realized like we should look at the soil and see what's going on, because why are we losing these trees so quickly? So we did some soil analysis and realized the soil was really dead. There was really no microbial activity. It was highly compacted. I think part of this is Alden Hopkins' design had a pea gravel ground plane, so people were encouraged to kind of walk that circle under the trees, and I think that had led to compaction over the years. So we doubled the scope of the project. We undertook a project of soil blending ahead of the tree replacement, using a combination of in-house and contracted support. First, we removed about 300 cubic yards of soil excavated from the tree pits. We hauled out the worst half and kept the best half. And then we consulted with Andrea Philippone and T. Fleischer from F2 Environmental Services, F2 Environmental Design. He's a real soil scientist, and she's a real boxwood expert. So they worked with us on teaching us how to mix a custom soil. It's not something I had ever had the opportunity to do. So there you see on the left-hand side, Mark Vetter, our IPM specialist, and I we're making soil balls to see how they hold up and see the consistency. And so it's really as much of an art as a science. You start with very well specified materials, but then the mixing of it is really an art, and we couldn't have done it without the help of our consultants. But we really learned a lot along the way, and now subsequently we've done soil mixing projects, so it's been a great skill set that we've added to our team. We conducted percolation tests to assure that the subsoils drained well, and then we installed a sand base and then added our custom mix and lifts, taking care to mix in the sand. So there's really no layers in this soil. It just goes from like a 80% sand at the bottom to about 30% at the top, and it's kind of a gradual change in media. And then the trees came, 86 new American hornbeams, 76 for the ellipse, and 10 additional backups that we planted in our on-site nursery. We still have them. If anyone needs a hornbeam. Yeah. So here are the hornbeams pictured in 2023. This is 5 years after, and several applications of compost tea. The trees are really well established. The gardeners have started to do some structural pruning on them. And actually this year was really the first year where they were kind of read as one mass instead of individual trees. So it's really exciting to see it kind of coming back to its glory. We also planted the beds underneath the trees with Isotoma fluviatilis. So a design departure from the pea gravel that Alden Hopkins had used, and a change that we felt would be better for the trees. It would be better for the soil. It would still provide kind of a reflective ground cover accent, especially when the Isotoma is in flower in the spring. It's kind of a sky blue flower that kind of feels like it's reflecting the sky. So we tried to capture some pea gravel attributes without putting the pea gravel back. And I spoke about compost tea. Our compost tea programs are worth spending a moment on. We have over the years kind of refined a process to be able to brew tea in-house. And here's a video of this is one drop of our infusion after I think 3 days of brewing. So you can see that's a predatory nematode swimming around in the middle there, and then plenty of flagellates and ciliates. There's really a lot of diversity in this product. So we're really happy with this process. Our consultant taught us it's a process, not a product. So you've got to really focus on the process. And we've dumped out plenty of batches that didn't make our standards, but it's really nice to be able to do this in-house, to be able to look at it under a microscope, see what you actually have, and then assess whether it's going to be good for the garden or not. And I really feel that this helped us invigorate our soil microbiome and really give those trees a good head start. So we try to make compost tea applications anytime we do a fungicidal application in the garden, or when we're doing new plantings for woody plants especially. So now I will return to this iconic beech tree to share a great tree preservation project with you. And for those of you at the National Arboretum, this might seem familiar. First, I will introduce you to Kurato Fujimoto. Kurato is a third-generation master gardener in Japan. He works at Kenrokuin Gardens, which is in the Kanazawa, Ishikawa prefect, and he is a master of hosue. Hosue are what you're looking at. It's a Japanese word. It means chin cane. So like when you put your chin on the desk is where that word comes from. And this is an indigenous practice that the Japanese have used to support trees for centuries, millennia actually. And so the purpose of these hosue and what they do in Japan is really, it's part of their tree preservation philosophy. They really view the life energy of trees differently than we do in Western culture. They really feel like the growing tips of the tree is where the life energy is, and so they feel a real kind of pressure to preserve that. Whereas in Western arboriculture, we often will prune trees back, we will retrench, we will try and kind of invigorate growth from the crown, and it's really a different approach. This mainly is done with cherry trees in Japan, and pine trees for ornamental training, but cherry trees, they do it to actually support the trees, and they have some really old cherry trees in Japan. There is Usazumi Zakura is over 1,400 years old, which is really well past the natural lifespan of a cherry. So, so this is one of those, there's some proof in the pudding things. There's not really any scientific physiological research that's been done on this yet. But Ron Henderson, who's a professor of landscape architecture at the Illinois Institute of Technology, and the person that really facilitated this work, is starting to think about how we can document and capture some data from this, because there are now about a dozen trees in the US that have received this treatment from Karatu, different species in different locations. And so it could be an interesting study. So how does this fit into our tree preservation goals? This is not a Japanese garden, but we are part of Dumbarton Oaks is facilitating cultural exchange and kind of exploration into the humanities. And so we felt like this was kind of interesting because it's a long-standing historic practice, and it seems to provide benefit to the tree. And so we wanted to do this. We wanted to learn how to do it, and so we were able to bring Karatu over and teach us the technique and the practice, and actually do it with him. And so we've chosen a couple trees at Dumbarton Oaks that are really iconic, that can't easily be replaced, and that we really want to try and preserve as long as possible. The beech tree being one of them. When this tree leaves the space, we won't be able to do our normal kind of cheat of pre-planting the next generation of beech, because this is dead center in the middle of the space. It lines up with all the axes of the space, and so when this tree leaves, that space will change for 50 years, and so it's I think really important to try and keep it around. Here is another tree that received the same treatment. This is a Katsura tree. This picture is taken in the fall of 2010. And here is a more recent image, fall of 2023. You can see some of those laterals have died back. Kids love to sit on that branch and climb on it. So this was one that we really wanted to preserve. This actually is one of the oldest Katsuras in the US, we think. We think it was planted around but somewhere between 1890 and 1900. This is a species that was only introduced into the US in around 1865. The specimen at the Arnold Arboretum, which was seed grown, I think, is from 1878. And it shows up in DC at local nurseries in around 1895. So that's kind of how we're dating it. We also have a drawing from Farrand, a survey of the property from 1922, that shows a tree in that location, a 20-inch tree. And so we did a little bit of kind of forensic backdating. The tree's hollow, so we can't core it, and I don't think we would even if we could. But it is definitely a specimen worth preserving. And so this is the one actually that we started with. So here's Ron Henderson's drawing of the tree and the planned supports for it. And I'll say this is in close collaboration with Karatu, who really decides where these things go and how they're going to go. And you could learn every technique for how to build and install hose-away, and you still would never be able to really do it without Karatu, because it's one of those things, again, it's as much of an art as a science. And he knows where to put them and whether it should be a bridge or a single. And it's really interesting to see him work. He speaks no English, so we were using a lot of Google Translate, but we all spoke tree, so it kept us together. And also, I should mention that Ron and Karatu did some work at the U.S. National Arboretum as well. There are 2 cherry trees that were supported there as well. There's also a 240-year-old sycamore up in Providence, Rhode Island, that has, I think, a 75-foot long lateral branch that has been supported as well. So this is really one of the best team building activities you could ever hope for. So it was a really great experience. This is the whole gardening team with Karatu. Getting the hose-away in. And in case any of you are curious, we use an air spade to excavate both for the beech tree and the Katsura. So we didn't cut any tree roots to get those hoseway installed. We had to move a couple hoseway, and Karate wasn't so happy about that, but we explained to him, we can't cut this route. We need to move this. And so he figured out a plan B for a few of them. And here's the finished result. I love it. I think it's really artistic, and hopefully it's going to help this tree. We're going to see now. We're watching for growth. If this does its intended effect, we should see this tree start to crawl back out across the lawn over the next handful of years. We were lucky. We even had an extra day with Karatu, and he liked being at Dumbarton Oaks so much that we had time to even put a support in one of the cherry trees on Cherry Hill, which is really the traditional species that this technique is used for. But not all the interventions are as fun as removing invasives or preserving trees using indigenous practices. Sometimes the challenge involves accessing, repairing, replacing old infrastructure while minimizing impact to the landscape and the historic fabric. This is the case in 2017 to 2018, when the gardens were closed for an entire year during an irrigation and stormwater improvement project that was necessitated by the failure of 100-year-old water supply lines in the garden. So it was needed to be done, but it was really difficult to do. This was actually right before I came on board to Dumbarton Oaks. I came on in the punch list phase of this project, so that was fun. But of course, given the sensitivities in the garden, with all the heritage trees, the topography, the sensitive architectural element, great care was taken to mitigate damage. Directional boring in some cases, as you can see on the left, was used to go. They actually bored under the beech terrace, so that beech tree got a line well under it. We did a lot of air spade trenching, which is that picture on the right, so as to minimize impacts to the trees. Entire fountains and pools were dismantled in order to transform them from fresh feed systems to recirculating systems. So we have 13 gardens in the fountain, and they were all designed 100 years ago. So it's a freshwater feed with an overflow leveler, and then all that water just goes into the combined system. So slowly but surely, we have retrofitted them to be recirculating systems. And then that Lover's Lane, Melisand's Alley I was showing you earlier, that charming little brick path, they lifted that whole path and ran the water line under that path because it was the furthest point from the trees. So really a lot of planning and care went into this project. Significant upgrades and repairs to the compromised stormwater pipes that lead from Dumbarton Oaks into the Dumbarton Oaks Park necessitated wide swaths of forsythia to be removed out of the forsythia dell. But luckily, it's forsythia. So after planting hundreds of young forsythia, we propagated from the plantings in the forsythia dell, and then 4 years of relentless weeding because we just got nailed with every invasive plant you can think of. We got back to the pre-construction condition. Some challenges are recurrent and unfortunately increasing. The frequency and severity of storms in DC has increased. The summer storms have had a much greater impact on the gardens. You can see here when your walkways become rivers, it's not good. At the downhill section of this walkway, there's a set of steps, and we had to repair a lot of grout joints, and it's been really tough on the infrastructure, especially with the topography that we have. And the terms microburst and derecho are used more frequently, and we see those results firsthand. Even with proactive tree care, we see regular damage exacerbated as the garden and the trees continue to mature. I'm really grateful for that Bliss motto, Quod Severus Metis, because I receive a lot of institutional support for proactive tree care. Really important because we manage the trees as a living collection. They're overly mature in some cases, and we have visiting public and fellows in those spaces. And so we really look at it from a risk mitigation standpoint. we have about 1,300 trees in the collection, and so they're all managed as a living collection, and their healthcare and any kind of intervention is tracked. And then finally, we focus our attention strategically on the ornament and architectural element throughout the gardens, the vast majority of which was designed by Farrand. She designed a significant collection of unique custom furniture, gates, arbors, finials, and other elements that we are actively and systematically preserving and restoring over the next decade. I was really surprised when I came to Dumbarton Oaks that some of the original wooden element was still in the garden, and so. But it is really towards the end of its life cycle, and so we're actively working on reproductions and replacements. As in her garden design, Farrand was inspired in her ornament by Gertrude Jekyll, by Rateau, by Du Cerceau, as is the case. Here's that arbor I was talking about earlier, and there is Du Cerceau's drawing of the original pavilion. And here's a picture from Gertrude Jekyll's 1918 book, Garden Ornament, basically a pattern book for designers of a garden house at Mirthley Castle in Perthshire. And here, Farrand often embellished on ideas shared in Gertrude Jekyll's book. And here you can see Jekyll's influence on Farrand's tool shed design for the cutting garden. But here's a really stunning view of the lower gardens from Arbor Terrace, overlooking into the kitchen gardens and the blooming cherries in the distance. But notice the pair of sheds there servicing the vegetable garden. Notice how they're laid out symmetrically in a formal space. But look how the roof lines are different. And you wouldn't notice that actually if you're facing them in the space, like from the front quote unquote of the garden. And so this is one of those kind of tricky Farrand moments where she is playing with formality and informality and kind of giving you a unique thing that you only see from this perspective, that's like a twist on a Jekyll design. Here's one more. This is a finial at Gayhurst in Buckinghamshire on the left, along with Farrand's creation at Dumbarton Oaks. So the furniture we treated a little differently. We separated the furniture from fixed ornament since the approaches are a little different. For the furniture, we embarked on a project 5 years ago with a local furniture designer to create 3D computer models of all the furniture that could be used for reproduction. And then we were using a furniture producer who makes FSC certified furniture. He basically has a teak plantation and furniture factory in Costa Rica. And so they manage the plantation, and it's all single chain of custody. So they're not even buying in any wood. They produce all their own wood. So we used FSC certified teak for some of these reproductions. The modeling project eliminated the need to send the one-of-a-kind Farrand pieces off-site. You can imagine the conversations I had to have with Harvard to ensure a falling apart one-of-a-kind Farrand bench so that I could ship it to Costa Rica. So we've been steadily reproducing the furniture every year and completed that large project I mentioned in 2021. So at this point, really almost all the furniture and kind of movable wood element in the garden has been restored or reproduced. I say restored because there is one example. This is still an original piece. This is quite a spectacular piece. We call this the kidney bench. And it's the original bench, but you can see that the legs have been replaced. There's been some surgical work done to it over the years. For the fixed ornaments, the challenges are a lot different as the work is mostly done on site in a sensitive way to preserve and restore the elements without damaging the gardens. So one example that we completed, oh boy, gotta wrap it up. One example that we completed during the pandemic was the restoration of 15 columns around Lover's Lane pool. Farron was inspired by her design for Lover's Lane Pool by the outdoor theater in Rome called the Bosco Parasio, which is the 17th century home of the Arcadian Literary Center. And it's a place that she visited when she was young in her travels, kind of picking up design aesthetic. The Blisses, it makes a lot of sense for them to have a performance space. They were big fans of the performing arts. They famously commissioned a piece by Igor Stravinsky for their 30th wedding anniversary, as well as pieces by Samuel Barber. So the 15 columns that were connected by chains and finilarns, they were in really critical condition. The columns were leaning and wobbly. They were cracking throughout. There was efflorescence at the bases, and 2 of the columns were missing their urns completely. So the project we did was to recast the urns. We recast the missing urns out of, we made latex molds and then recast them out of a yawn mortar. We consolidated the stone, we underpinned the columns, and we added breakaway links to the chains so that if anything were to fall, it wouldn't be a domino effect. We also, well, this was really the first in a series of project aimed at the ornamental element throughout the gardens. And this was really made possible by a comprehensive survey that we had done. When I first started, we went through and looked at it was about 350 pieces to kind of figure out what was in the worst condition, what needed work immediately. These columns were really at risk of falling over in some cases, so it was a very easy decision to start here. And now we're working our way through to some of the other elements in the gardens. A lot of the fixed wooden element. This is an example from Pebble Garden, which is, it's an arbor that was in bad shape. It's got a wisteria vine growing on it. And the arbor was rotten. It was actually about to kind of collapsing in on itself. So we wanted to save the wisteria. We wanted to replace what needed replacing without doing a full scale kind of intervention. And so we worked with a preservationist carpenter. He was very surgical approach. We jacked up the wisteria above the arbor, and then he was able to replace only the pieces of the arbor that needed replacement. So here you can see the new wood on the right-hand side of the image is some of the original material. We used Western red cedar for this, Thea plicata. So we're trying to use domestic species where we can and not, ship teak in for these kinds of projects. And the last one I will show you, this is an ongoing project. This is the perspective gate. It's an area at the bottom of the garden. It's kind of an awkward moment at the property line. And Farron created this panel that is supposed to, it's a trompe l'oeil. It makes you kind of feel like you can keep walking into that fountain. And she even kind of narrowed the walkway as you approach this gate so that it helps give you that perspective. But it was in really bad shape. It has been, there was a lot of rot and squirrel damage and other issues with it. So this is an example where we're doing kind of a complete rebuild. We've saved the original elements that were worth saving. And even some of the wood that couldn't be saved, the carpenter was able to save parts of it and create some new elements from some of the older wood. And so we've repurposed some of the wood in that respect. And then he redesigned how the gates go together and how they hang on the wall. They used to sit on the ground, and that contributed to the water infiltration and rot. And so now it's on a French cleat, hanging about a 1/4 inch off the ground, and all the panels have been separated. So if we ever need to work on one, we can basically pull it off and work on it and bring it back. So we try to make improvements to joinery and construction and engineering where we can, especially if we can hide them and not, show the changes. So the last thing I'll say is just that gardening is a team effort, and I am very blessed to lead an incredible team of dedicated garden professionals at Dumbarton Oaks. It's really a joy to work with these folks, and I couldn't do it without them. And that's all I have for you. To take questions. Yeah. Yeah, I went a little long.
Yeah, maybe take a few questions online and then a few in-house.
Sure. How do I get to the online folks? Oh, there we go. All right.
Well,
Does anybody, let's see, in the chat.
no signal detected.
Uh-oh. Yeah, I see, folks. I don't see any questions. Let's go to some questions in the room. Yes.
Is private garden ever open to the public?
It is. It's open Tuesday through Sunday, depending on the time of year, 2 p.m. to 5:30 or 6:30, depending on.
I think your question was the private part.
Oh, the non-public part. That is not open to the public. Yeah, that functions really as a campus for our fellowship community. The library is located there, and then some fellowship housing as
Can
well.
you make special arrangements?
Sure. For a group like this, sure. I'd be happy to, yeah, field trip. I hear you guys, I hear you do field trips. So one of the perks of being here in person, we can schedule a field trip. Yes.
One of the comments on the cat search, 40 million years ago, we used to grow in Canada.
Yeah.
80 now 80 degrees north.
Uh-huh.
Along with medicine plant
Uh-huh.
and ginkgo.
Yeah.
It's really beautiful.
Right. Yes, it is. Yeah. In the long history, well, yes. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's true.
Interaction with Oak Springs and Bunny Melons Estate.
Yes. I don't know a ton about that. I know that they were friendly. It was more Miss Bliss and Bunny Mellon that were liaising. Mrs. Bliss was a little older than Bunny Mellon. They competed for the same auctions. They competed over the same art. I'm sure you all know Margaret Mee, the botanical illustrator. Miss Bliss, yeah, I'm seeing them here. Well, Miss Bliss collected, I think we have 18 original Margaret Mee drawings, and Bunny Mellon also was collecting Margaret Mee, and they were fighting over those drawings, I think so. But in terms of like the design, I don't have any record of any kind of formal interaction. Farron did some work in the DC area when she was working at Dumbarton Oaks. She did a little garden at Green Spring Gardens in Alexandria. But I don't have any records of her ever working out there at Oak Spring. It's a good question.
8 of the Katsura trees here.
Yes, in the Haupt Garden.
Yeah. No, right here.
Oh, here, yes.
And one of these years, about maybe 7-8 years ago,
Mhm.
somebody cut all of them down
Mhm.
and planted the Capinus Bacillus from there.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's a shame.
I saved the one.
You
I
saved
saved the seedling, like, if I-
I love it. Robin.
Oh, I'm cutting, I just-
If it's a cutting, it's not, that doesn't count. We're pretty independent. We liaise with them. I call them with questions. Actually, Michael Dosman, who's the living keeper of the living collection. He's got the coolest job title ever. Yeah, keeper of the living collection. He's the keeper for short. He's quite knowledgeable on Katsura. He did his dissertation on Katsura, and so I asked him about his opinions when we were trying to age that tree. Ned Friedman's been down a bunch to just liaise, but we haven't done a lot of kind of formal collaboration or anything like that. My group is I have 12 people across 16 acres, so it's a lot of ground to cover, and so we don't unfortunately have the capacity to do a lot of research or what I try to do is offer up Dumbarton Oaks as a resource for those who want to do research. So I'm involved with the Boxwood Blight Insight Group, and we've had some scientists come. Tony Aiello at Longwood Gardens has come to sample Magnolia denudata. I'm working towards getting accredited through ArbNet as an arboretum, and that would also kind of help us become a resource. So I'm interested, especially where it doesn't involve staff time. If we can open up the place for a study that then and if my staff are able to participate a little bit, but they still have jobs to do, and it's really hard for us to keep up with all the work. This spring we're inviting the DC Bird Alliance to come and do bird counts on a weekly basis, and so I'm sure the gardeners will want to participate a little bit with that, but they won't be doing it every day, all day, or anything like that. So yeah, all right. We've got great birds at the garden, so.
Yeah, because it's right next to Rock Creek.
Yeah,
Park, too, right?
yeah. Other questions? That's a great question. We used to have a volunteer program before my time. It was disbanded before my time. I've relaunched it in a pilot program sort of way. So we only have 4 volunteers right now, but they are all full-time designers at Event Sweden. So I am really like I am so I was so humbled that I mean, and a couple of them are principal designers, and they dedicate 3 hours a week that they have to make up at their boss makes them make up that production time. So they really are donating their time to come to the garden. So it's pretty impressive. I would like to grow that over time. It's just hard. We're just small in terms of like even like the locker room and just the space that we have. Yeah. Yeah. But volunteer programs are really important though.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, Jonathan, thank you so much.
Question.
Oh, we have a
one online question. Last
One
time I went there, I noticed that some of the dams looked like they were deteriorating. That created all the water features in the park, and I was in the gardens. I was wondering if you guys are addressing this issue of deterioration of the dams.
Yes, the you're talking about the weirs down in Dumbarton Oaks Park, which we do not manage that property, unfortunately. So Farron designed really 50 acres of gardens. I didn't even get to show you the other 27 acres that are really no longer existing, but there were significant wild gardens down in what is now Dumbarton Oaks Park. There were ephemerals and meadows. She widened the tributary in places and created waterfalls. And I think that's what Steve is talking about. In 1941-42, that whole parcel was donated to the National Park Service. So that's all managed by the National Park Service. And it's a really challenging site because it's at the bottom of a watershed. It gets all the water from Wisconsin Avenue, Massachusetts Avenue, and our property. And it's really a challenging site. So they do have a conservancy, Dumbarton Oaks Park Conservancy, and they are taking volunteers. So if any of you feel like you want to help rebuild those dams, they are definitely looking for help down there.
Thanks.
Yeah, we do try to help them where we try to pass hoses through the fence or help them with cuttings when they were reestablishing their forsythia. We helped them with that, but that's about all we're allowed to do. All right, my pleasure. Thank you all. My pleasure. We got through the technical.
Yeah, sorry about that.
You made me sweat a little. That's okay.
So it's good to make you a little.
Yeah.